I stood paralyzed in the marble-floored lobby, staring at 3 garbage bags bulging with my possessions. My potted succulent peeked pathetically from the top of one bag, soil spilling onto my framed achievement certificates. My wireless mouse dangled by its cord from another, like it was trying to escape. "You're 25, Avira said, tapping her silver watch with a manicured nail. "We're downsizing. Get out now." I had just stepped through the revolving doors, my carry-on still trailing behind me. The overnight flight from Phoenix had left my eyes raw and my mind foggy. 12 hours ago, I'd been shaking hands with the CEO of the largest shipping company in the Southwest, securing a contract worth millions after 3 days of nonstop negotiations. Behind Avira stood a cluster of my colleagues: Tristan from accounting, Naomi and Spencer from marketing, Reed from legal. Their expressions ranged from shocked to awkwardly amused. Reed actually smirked, his eyes darting between me and Avira, like he was watching a particularly juicy reality show confrontation. "I don't understand," I managed, my voice embarrassingly small in the cavernous lobby. The security guard at the front desk pretended to study his computer screen, but his eyes kept flicking up to watch the scene unfold. "It's simple, Brielle," Avira continued, louder than necessary. "The company is restructuring. Your position has been eliminated. Everything you need is in these bags." The front doors opened and 2 women in sleek business attire walked in, pausing when they noticed our group. Their presence drew even more attention to my humiliation. I felt sweat gathering at my hairline, but the Henderson account, I just finalized. "We'll handle all client transitions." Avira cut me off, checking her phone. "The separation paperwork will arrive by email. Your building access has already been terminated." I reached for my key card out of habit, but it was upstairs on my desk, alongside the notes I'd compiled for Monday's presentation. "My laptop has all my files," I said, suddenly panicking about 3 years of work. "My contacts, my DISHN, company property." Avira smiled thinly. "It has already wiped your personal files to a flash drive." She nodded toward the smallest garbage bag. "Everything else belongs to us." Naomi at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. Spencer studied the floor tiles like they contained the secrets of the universe. "You can't be serious," I whispered, the reality beginning to sink in. "I've been here 3 years. I deserve." "You deserve exactly what you're getting," Avira interrupted again, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "Perhaps you should have remembered who runs this department before getting so familiar with our clients." The accusation hit like ice water. I'd done nothing wrong except do my job exceptionally well. "You have 15 minutes before I call security," Avira said, checking her watch again. "I suggest you don't make this more embarrassing than it already is." The crowd watching grew as people streamed in for the workday. Some slowed their pace, rubbernecking like passing a highway accident. Others hurried past, pretending not to notice. I stood there, jet-lagged and disoriented, as my professional life sat stuffed into garbage bags at my feet. 3 years of 60-hour weeks, 3 years of canceled plans with friends, 3 years of being the first to arrive and last to leave. I bent down to gather the bags, struggling with their awkward weight. Nobody moved to help. When I finally straightened, balancing all 3 bags while trying to maintain some dignity, I caught Avira's expression, a fleeting glimpse of something that looked like satisfaction. That's when I knew. This wasn't about downsizing. This was personal. I shouldered my way through the lobby, past the staring faces and whispered comments. The weight of the bags strained my flight-stiffened muscles. Halfway to the exit, my planner fell out, pages fluttering open to reveal color-coded client notes and meeting schedules stretching months into the future. I left it there on the floor, a bright splash of organization amid chaos. Outside in the parking garage, I somehow managed to stuff the bags into my trunk. I slid into the driver's seat and gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. Through the windshield, I could see them all still standing in the lobby, watching me through the glass doors. I started the engine, and then, instead of crying or screaming or peeling out of the garage in a fury of burning rubber and exhaust, I did something that would change everything. I smiled. It wasn't forced or fake. It was calm, knowing. I waved at the cluster of people in the lobby, put my car in reverse, and drove away. None of them realized what they'd just done, but they would. Oh, they would. If you're enjoying this story so far, please hit that like button to let me know. Subscribe to catch the next part, and leave a comment below about what you think Brielle might do next. Now, let's continue with our story. My name is Brielle Kerwin, and until 3 hours ago, I was the senior client relations specialist at one of the most prestigious consulting firms in the city. I wasn't always the quiet, competent professional they'd just tossed aside like yesterday's lunch. Growing up in a tiny apartment above my mother's struggling tailor shop had taught me to fight for every opportunity. My mother, with her calloused fingers and determined smile, had drilled into me that education was my escape route. Be so good they can't ignore you, she'd say while pinning hems until midnight. I'd won a partial scholarship to university and worked 2 jobs to cover the rest. 4 years of sleeping 5 hours a night while maintaining a 3.9 GPA had earned me my degree and the attention of several recruiters. When the offer came from Avira's firm, it had seemed like a dream. Healthcare benefits, retirement plan, a salary that meant my mother could finally retire. I drove aimlessly after leaving the office, my mind struggling to process what had happened. The Henderson deal had been worth millions. I'd spent months cultivating that relationship, learning about their operations, understanding their pain points. I knew the names of the CEO's children, remembered his assistant's birthday, and had custom designed a solution that addressed every concern their board had raised. Avira had barely participated in any of the meetings, but her name appeared first on all the proposals. That was our unspoken arrangement. I did the work, she took the credit, and the company prospered. Until today. I pulled into a coffee shop parking lot and finally let myself break down. The tears came in silent, angry waves. I wasn't crying because I'd lost my job. I was crying because I'd been betrayed. My phone buzzed with messages from concerned colleagues, not the ones who'd stood behind Avira, but the ones who worked in other departments. News traveled fast. What happened? Are you okay? This doesn't make sense. I ignored them all and dialed my mother instead. They fired me, I said when she answered. Her silence spoke volumes. Then, come home. I'll make tea. My mother's tea couldn't fix this, but her tiny house in the suburbs was exactly where I needed to be. Away from the gleaming office tower with its marble lobby and glass doors. Away from Avira and her watchful eyes. Away from the humiliation. I spent that first day in a fog, recounting the story to my mother, who listened with narrowed eyes and pursed lips. Something doesn't add up, she finally said. Why now, after you just secured that big client? The question haunted me as I lay awake that night. Why now? The timing made no sense, unless someone didn't want me there for the aftermath of the Henderson deal. The next morning, I forced myself to review the termination paperwork that had arrived by email. The legal language was cold and impersonal. Reduction in workforce. At-will employment. 2 weeks severance. Nothing about my achievements or contributions. Nothing about the reason behind the sudden decision. At the bottom of the email was a non-disclosure agreement and a non-compete clause that would prevent me from working with any of the firm's clients for 12 months. I almost signed it automatically, the obedient employee to the end, but something stopped me. A memory surfaced from 2 weeks earlier. I had stayed late to prepare presentation materials for the Henderson meeting. The office was nearly empty when I heard voices from Avira's glass-walled office. The door was partially open, and Avira was speaking to Tristan, her voice carrying clearly in the quiet space. Brielle is becoming a problem, she'd said. The clients are asking for her directly now. Henderson specifically requested her for the Phoenix meetings. So, what are you going to do? Tristan had asked. I've already done it, Avira replied. Minka starts next month. Her father and I go way back. She'll take over Brielle's accounts. What about Brielle? She's young. She'll bounce back. Besides, technically we're downsizing her department. They'd laughed then, the sound slicing through me like a knife. I'd gathered my things and slipped out, convincing myself I'd misunderstood. Surely my stellar performance would protect me. Now, staring at the non-compete agreement, that conversation took on new meaning. I wasn't fired because of downsizing. I was fired because I'd become too valuable, because the clients preferred me to Avira. I closed the email without signing anything. That's when my phone rang. An unfamiliar number with our city's area code. Is this Brielle Kerwin? A man's voice asked when I answered. Yes. Who's this? Calvin Henderson. We met in Phoenix? I've been trying to reach you through your office, but they're giving me the runaround. Something about you being no longer with the company? My heart raced. Calvin Henderson, CEO of Henderson Shipping, was calling me personally. That's correct, I said carefully. As of yesterday. Well, that's downright strange timing, he replied. Especially since I specifically told your boss I wanted you as our point person moving forward. The pieces clicked into place. Mr. Henderson, Calvin, please. Calvin, what exactly did Avira tell you about my departure? His answer chilled me to the bone. She said you'd accepted another position, that you'd left them high and dry right after the contract signing. He paused, but that didn't sound like the woman who spent 3 days helping us navigate our restructuring. So I decided to call you directly. Avira had lied to a multi-million-dollar client about me. I was terminated yesterday, I said, my voice steadier than I felt, when I returned from Phoenix. The silence on the other end stretched uncomfortably before Calvin spoke again. I see. Well, this certainly changes things. Would you be available for lunch tomorrow? There's something I'd like to discuss with you. As I hung up, a notification appeared, an email from another client, asking if the rumors of my departure were true. Then another message, from a junior colleague I'd mentored, expressing confusion and concern. I set my phone aside and opened my laptop. Instead of job hunting, I found myself creating a new document. At the top, I typed, Client Contact List. From memory, I began recording every client relationship I'd built over 3 years. Names, preferences, pain points, project histories, information that lived in my head, not in the company database. Details no non-compete could take from me. By evening, I had 4 pages of notes and a decision. I wouldn't sign the non-compete. I wouldn't fade quietly away. Avira thought she'd eliminated a threat. Instead, she'd created one. As the sun set, my phone lit up with a notification. A text message from an unknown number. Brielle, this is Naomi from the office. Something weird is happening with the Henderson account. Avira can't find your notes, and the client is asking questions she can't answer. Where did you keep the Henderson files? I stared at the message, a slow warmth spreading through me. It had been exactly 24 hours since my unceremonious dismissal, and already, things were starting to unravel. I didn't reply to Naomi's message. Instead, I watched as my phone lit up with 3 more notifications in quick succession. Brielle, it's important. Please call me. Avira is freaking out. The Henderson implementation meeting is tomorrow. The implementation meeting. Of course. The part where all the promises made during negotiations had to be translated into actionable plans. The part I usually handled. I set my phone face down on the table and made myself a cup of tea. My mother watched me from the doorway of her small kitchen. You're smiling, she observed. That's new. Just thinking about something, I replied, stirring honey into my cup. About how quickly they realize they need you? I looked up at her shrewd expression. My mother had survived an abusive marriage, immigrated to a new country alone with a child, and built a business from nothing. She understood more about power dynamics than most corporate executives. Something like that, I admitted. She nodded and returned to her sewing room, where she now made costumes for local theater productions, not because she needed the money anymore, but because she loved creating beautiful things. The next morning, I met Calvin Henderson at an upscale restaurant downtown. He greeted me with a firm handshake and concerned eyes. I checked into the situation, he said after we ordered. Spoke with some board members I know. This wasn't a downsizing. I'm aware, I replied, keeping my voice neutral despite the anger still simmering beneath my calm exterior. What happened yesterday at the implementation meeting was, he paused, searching for the right word, illuminating. Your replacement seemed unfamiliar with the most basic elements of our agreement. Minka, I supplied. She's new, very new. Calvin agreed. And your former boss struggled to answer questions about the custom logistics module you designed for us, the one that was the deciding factor in our signing with your firm. I sipped my water, waiting. I'll be direct, Brielle. We signed with your firm because of you. The board was impressed with your understanding of our operations and your creative solutions. Now we're concerned about implementation. He slid a business card across the table. I'd like to hire you as an independent consultant to oversee the transition. Whatever your former firm was paying you, I'll double it. My heart raced. This was an unexpected turn, a golden opportunity handed to me less than 48 hours after being unceremoniously fired. But something felt off. I appreciate the offer, I said carefully, but I'm concerned about potential conflicts. I haven't signed the non-compete agreement yet, but we've already consulted our legal team, Calvin interrupted. Since you were terminated without cause, and since we approached you rather than the other way around, any non-compete would be difficult to enforce. Besides, he smiled, we're not asking you to take our business elsewhere. We're asking you to ensure we get what we paid for from your former employer. It was elegant. I would still be working on the Henderson account, but now as their representative rather than Avira's. I would be in meetings with my former colleagues, with Avira, monitoring their performance. I'll need to think about it, I said, though my mind was already racing with possibilities. Of course, but don't think too long. We have another implementation meeting scheduled for Friday. As we finished lunch, my phone buzzed with another message from Avira. Where are the Henderson implementation templates? This is urgent. I tucked my phone away without responding and thanked Calvin for lunch. On the drive home, I called Ezra, a lawyer friend from college who specialized in employment law. They can't enforce a non-compete if you haven't signed it, he confirmed after hearing my situation. And terminating you immediately after you landed a major client would make any judge suspicious. Want me to review any paperwork they send? Please, I agreed. And one more thing. If I were to start my own consulting business, what should I know? His advice was thorough and practical. By the time I arrived home, I had a to-do list that included registering a business name, setting up a business bank account, and creating a basic website. 3 days after being fired, I had accomplished all three. I named my consultancy Carowin Solutions and created a simple professional website highlighting my experience in client relations and implementation management. I made no mention of specific clients or projects from my previous employment. That same day, I accepted Calvin Henderson's offer. The first implementation meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. Friday at my former office building. I dressed carefully that morning, a charcoal gray suit I'd never worn to the office before, subtle makeup, my hair styled differently than my usual work look. Small changes that added up to a new image. Brielle the independent consultant, not Brielle the subordinate. The security guard did a double take when I approached the front desk. Miss Kerwin, I thought, I'm here for the Henderson implementation meeting, I explained, presenting Calvin's business card. I'm consulting for them now. His eyebrows shot up as he made a quick call, then handed me a visitor badge. 15th floor conference room. The elevator ride gave me time to steady my nerves. When the doors opened on 15, I nearly collided with Reed from legal. Brielle? He sputtered, coffee sloshing in his cup. What are you doing here? Working, I replied simply, walking past him toward the conference room. I arrived 5 minutes early, but Calvin and 2 members of his team were already there, along with Naomi and Spencer from marketing. Their expressions when they saw me ranged from shock, Spencer, to cautious relief, Naomi. Brielle will be overseeing the implementation from our side, Calvin announced, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Naomi's eyes widened. Spencer studied his tablet intently. At precisely 10 a.m., Avira strode into the room, followed by Tristan and a young woman I assumed was Minka. Avira stopped dead when she saw me, her professional smile freezing in place. What is the meaning of this? She asked, her voice low but sharp. Ms. Kerwin is representing Henderson Shipping's interests during implementation. Calvin explained smoothly. Given her intimate knowledge of the project, we felt it was a prudent addition to ensure quality control. Avira's face cycled through several expressions before settling on a tight smile. How resourceful of you, Calvin. The meeting proceeded with excruciating awkwardness. Minka clearly had no understanding of the complex logistics module I'd designed. Avira kept interrupting to clarify points that only confused matters further. Tristan repeatedly checked his phone, as if hoping for rescue. Through it all, I remained professionally detached, asking pointed questions when necessary and taking careful notes. I didn't need to be vindictive or petty. The situation was doing all the work for me. After 2 painful hours, Calvin called for a break. As people filed out for coffee, Avira cornered me by the window. "Clever move," she hissed. "But if you think this little stunt will work—" "This isn't a stunt," I interrupted calmly. "This is business. Henderson hired me to protect their investment. I'm simply doing my job. You're trying to sabotage me." "No, Avira. You did that yourself. When you fired the only person who fully understood this project." Her eyes narrowed. "I've built this department from nothing. Do you really think one client can take me down?" "I don't want to take you down," I replied truthfully. "I just want to ensure Henderson gets what they paid for." It wasn't entirely a lie. I didn't want to destroy Avira or the company. I just wanted justice, and perhaps a little recognition of my worth. As the meeting reconvened, I noticed Naomi watching me with newfound respect. Even Spencer seemed impressed by my composure. By the end of the day, we had a revised implementation schedule that would require twice-weekly meetings, all of which I would attend as Henderson's representative. "Well handled," Calvin said as we left the building together. "Though I admit, the entertainment value alone was worth your fee." I smiled politely but didn't engage with the joke. This wasn't about humiliating Avira, satisfying as that might be. This was about establishing myself as a professional in my own right. Over the next 2 weeks, my phone continued to buzz with messages from my former workplace. Not just from Naomi now, but from other colleagues seeking information about clients, systems, and processes that only I fully understood. I answered some, ignored others, always professional but never giving away more than necessary. Meanwhile, word spread about my new consulting business. A former client called to congratulate me on my promotion and casually mentioned they were unhappy with their current service. Another asked if I could review a proposal they'd received, just as a favor. I redirected these conversations carefully, never soliciting business directly, but making it clear I was available for consultation. It was a delicate balance. I didn't want to appear vindictive or predatory, but I also knew my value now in a way I hadn't before. 3 weeks after my firing, I received an unexpected visitor at my mother's house. Spencer from marketing stood awkwardly on the porch, clutching a manila envelope. "Sorry to just show up," he said when I opened the door. But I didn't want this going through official channels. Inside the envelope was an internal memo about the Henderson account, marked confidential. It detailed mounting concerns about implementation delays and client dissatisfaction. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked. Spencer shifted uncomfortably. "Because it's a mess, Brielle. Minka quit yesterday. Just walked out in tears after Avira berated her in front of everyone. The client is threatening to cancel, and..." He hesitated. "Avira's blaming you." "Me? I'm doing exactly what Henderson hired me to do. She's saying you're deliberately withholding information, that you're sabotaging the implementation to make her look bad." I handed the envelope back to him. "I'm not withholding anything, Spencer. I'm helping Henderson navigate a system I designed. If Avira can't fulfill the contract without me, that's not my problem." He nodded slowly. "For what it's worth, I think what happened to you was wrong. A lot of us do." After he left, I sat on the porch swing, processing this new information. Avira was growing desperate. Good. But her accusations stung. I had been professional at every meeting, helpful when directly asked. I wasn't sabotaging anything, was I? The thought nagged at me as I prepared for the next implementation meeting. Was I unconsciously making things more difficult? Was I enjoying their struggles too much? I arrived at the office building the next morning with these questions still churning in my mind. But what I found in the conference room pushed all doubts aside. Avira sat at the head of the table, a triumphant gleam in her eye. Beside her was a stranger in an expensive suit. Calvin and his team were already seated, looking uncomfortable. "Ah, Brielle," Avira said with false warmth. "So glad you could join us. This is Dominic from our legal department. He has some concerns about your involvement with this client. Dominic slid a document across the table. We believe you're in violation of your non-compete agreement, Ms. Kerwin. I never signed a non-compete, I replied evenly. It was included in your original employment contract, Dominic countered. Page 17, paragraph 3. He was right. I remembered now. A clause buried in the fine print of my hiring paperwork 3 years ago. A standard boilerplate I'd barely noticed at the time. Calvin frowned. This seems unnecessarily adversarial. Ms. Kerwin is providing an essential service to ensure the successful implementation of the system she designed. Nevertheless, Dominic continued, we must insist that she cease all involvement with Henderson Shipping immediately, or will be forced to pursue legal action. The room fell silent. All eyes turned to me, waiting for my response. I could feel the trap closing around me. If I fought this, I'd be entangled in expensive legal proceedings. If I backed down, I'd lose my only client and my newfound confidence along with it. I glanced at Calvin, who gave me a slight nod of reassurance. Then I looked directly at Avira, whose smile hadn't quite reached her eyes. I understand your position, I said carefully, and I'd be happy to comply with any valid legal obligations. Avira's smile widened. However, I continued, before we proceed, I think we should address the other legal matter at hand. What other matter? Dominic asked, frowning. I opened my laptop and turned it to face the room. On the screen was an email, one I'd recovered from my personal archives the night before. This is an email from Avira to me, dated last year, explicitly authorizing me to develop custom solutions for clients under my own supervision. It effectively creates an exception to the standard non-compete for work I personally developed. Avira's face drained of color. That's taken out of context. The context is quite clear. I continued, scrolling to show a series of similar communications. As is the pattern of authorization for independent work, my lawyer believes this constitutes a modification of my employment terms. It was a bluff. I hadn't actually consulted a lawyer about these specific emails, but the documents were real, saved because I'd been proud of the autonomy Avira had granted me, autonomy that, ironically, had led to my current situation. Dominic reached for the laptop, scanning the emails with growing concern. I'll need to review these more thoroughly. Of course, I agreed. In the meantime, perhaps we should focus on ensuring Henderson's implementation proceeds smoothly? Unless you'd prefer to explain to them why their project is being delayed by internal disputes? Calvin cleared his throat. Speaking as the client, we would indeed prefer to continue with Ms. Kerwin's involvement. Any other outcome would force us to reconsider our relationship with your firm entirely. The threat hung in the air like a storm cloud. Avira's carefully constructed trap had backfired spectacularly. After a tense silence, Dominic gathered his papers. We'll continue this discussion at a later date. For now, the meeting can proceed as planned. As he and Avira whispered heatedly in the corner, I caught Calvin watching me with newfound respect. I'd stood my ground. I'd outsmarted them at their own game. But this wasn't victory. Not yet. It was merely the first real battle in what was becoming a war of attrition. And I was just getting started. The stalemate with Avira continued for the next 2 weeks. I attended every Henderson implementation meeting, providing guidance while carefully maintaining my professional distance. Dominic from legal watched me like a hawk, but never followed through on his threats of legal action. The emails I'd produced had created enough uncertainty to keep them at bay. See, for now. Behind the scenes, however, things were shifting rapidly. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from former colleagues seeking advice or clarification on projects I'd managed. I answered when I could, always polite but increasingly brief. My priority was establishing my own business, not solving their problems for free. Calvin Henderson proved to be more than just a client. He became an advocate. He mentioned my services to other business owners in his network, describing me as the problem solver who saved our implementation. 3 weeks after starting my consultancy, I signed my second client. A week later, a third. Meanwhile, the situation at my former workplace deteriorated. Spencer, who had become an unexpected ally, kept me informed through occasional texts. Second implementation meeting disaster. Client threatening to pull out. Avira presented your logistics model as her own. couldn't answer basic questions about how it works. 3 people quit marketing department yesterday. I took no pleasure in their struggles. Well, perhaps a small amount where Avira was concerned, but I remained focused on building something new rather than watching something old crumble. 6 weeks after my firing, I signed the lease on a small office space downtown. It wasn't much, Terry. Just 2 rooms with large windows and enough space for a desk, meeting table, and small kitchenette. But it was mine. No glass walls for others to peer through. No politics. No Avira. My mother helped me move in, arranging my sparse furniture with the same care she once arranged fabric in her tailor shop. "You need plants," she declared, surveying the empty corners. "Life needs growing things." The next day, she arrived with 3 potted plants, hardy, low-maintenance varieties that could survive my irregular attention. One was a cutting from the succulent that had been unceremoniously dumped into a garbage bag on the day of my firing. I'd managed to salvage it, and now its offspring would witness my new beginning. That afternoon, as I was setting up my new computer system, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. "Is this Brielle Kerwin?" a woman's voice asked. "Speaking. This is Lyra Westerly. I'm the board chair at your former employer." My hand tightened around the phone. The board chair? In 6 weeks of escalating drama, the board had never been mentioned. "What can I do for you, Miss Westerly?" "I think we should meet in person," she replied. "There are some matters we need to discuss regarding your departure from the company and your current relationship with Henderson Shipping." My stomach clenched. Had Avira finally convinced the board to take legal action against me? "I'm available tomorrow afternoon," I said, keeping my voice steady despite my racing thoughts. "Perfect. My assistant will send the details." After we hung up, I immediately called Ezra for legal advice. He agreed to accompany me to the meeting and spent an hour reviewing my situation, the absence of a signed non-compete after my termination, the emails authorizing my independent work, the circumstances of my firing. "Legally, you're on solid ground," he concluded. "But board chairs don't typically get involved in departmental staffing disputes. Something bigger is happening." The meeting was set for 2 p.m. the next day at a private dining room in an upscale hotel downtown. When Ezra and I arrived, we found not just Lyra Westerly, but 3 other board members waiting for us. No sign of Avira. Lyra, a sharp-eyed woman in her 60s with a silver bob and understated jewelry, stood to greet us. "Thank you for coming, Ms. Kerwin, and you've brought counsel. Very prudent." She gestured to the others. "This is informal, but we thought it important to meet face to face." We settled around the table, and Lyra wasted no time getting to the point. "We've been conducting an internal review of recent events in the client relations department," she began. "What we've found is concerning." One of the board members, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, slid a folder across the table. "This contains documentation of systematic credit misappropriation, client relationship interference, and potentially discriminatory termination practices," he explained, "all centering around your former supervisor, Avira Donovan." I opened the folder to find emails, meeting minutes, and performance reviews. A paper trail showing how Avira had consistently taken credit for my work, deliberately kept me from certain high-profile meetings, and planned my termination weeks before the Henderson deal was finalized. "We became aware of these issues only after multiple client complaints following your departure," Lyra continued. "Henderson Shipping was simply the most vocal. Others have expressed similar concerns about continuity and account management." I glanced at Ezra, who gave me a subtle nod to continue listening. "Why are you sharing this with me?" I asked carefully. Lyra exchanged looks with her colleagues before answering. "We have 2 proposals for your consideration. First, we'd like to offer you your position back, with a substantial promotion, salary increase, and direct reporting line to the executive team, CS, bypassing Ms. Donovan entirely." The offer hung in the air like an unexpected gift. 6 weeks ago, I would have jumped at the chance. Now, I waited for the other shoe to drop. "And the second proposal?" Lyra smiled slightly. "Alternatively, we'd like to discuss acquiring your consultancy." That, I had not expected. "You want to buy my 6-week-old business?" "We want to acquire your expertise and client relationships before our competitors do," corrected the woman sitting beside Lyra. Your departure has revealed significant vulnerabilities in our client management structure. Several major accounts are now at risk. Ezra leaned forward. Before we discuss either option, we need clarity on Ms. Kerwin's legal standing. There have been threats of litigation regarding non-compete violations. Those threats were not authorized by the board, Lyra said firmly, and they will not be pursued, regardless of your decision today. For the next hour, we discussed details of both proposals. The return offer included a director-level position with a salary double my previous one. The acquisition offer included a generous upfront payment plus a 3-year consulting contract. We'll need time to consider, Ezra said as the meeting concluded. Of course, Lyra agreed. But we would appreciate an answer within the week. The situation remains fluid. Outside the hotel, Ezra and I dissected the meeting. They're desperate, he observed. Henderson was just the tip of the iceberg. They're losing clients left and right without you. But why acquisition? Why not just hire me back? Because they know you might leave again. This way, they lock in your expertise and eliminate a potential competitor in one move. I spent the next 3 days weighing my options. The money was tempting. Either offer would set me up financially for years. But returning meant working in the same environment that had discarded me so callously. Acquisition meant giving up my newfound independence before I'd truly experienced it. There was also the matter of Avira. Neither option had clarified her status, though reading between the lines, it seemed the board was building a case for her removal. On the third day, as I sat in my new office, staring at the contract drafts Ezra had prepared, my phone rang. Calvin Henderson again. Brielle, have you heard the news? What news? Your former employer just lost the Beaumont account. It's all over the industry forums. Beaumont was their second largest client after Henderson, a relationship that predated even Avira's time at the company. What happened? I asked, genuinely shocked. Apparently, there was a major service failure last week. No one could access the specialized reporting portal your team had built for them. When they called for support, they got a runaround. He paused. Word is, they're looking for new consultants. I may have mentioned your name. After we hung up, I sat in silence, processing this development. The Beaumont account represented millions in annual revenue. Its loss would be devastating, possibly fatal for Avira's department. My phone buzzed with a text from Spencer. Total meltdown here. Avira called emergency all hands. Beaumont gone, blaming everyone but herself. Another piece clicked into place. The board's urgency suddenly made perfect sense. That evening, I made my decision. I called Lyra Westerly directly. I've considered both offers, I told her, and I have a counter-proposal. 2 days later, I walked into my former office building, not as a visitor or consultant, but as the newly appointed head of client success, a division created specifically for me that would operate parallel to Avira's department, but with oversight of all major account implementations. The announcement had been made company-wide an hour earlier. Employees stared as I crossed the lobby, whispers following in my wake. The security guard grinned and handed me a new access card, not a visitor badge. Welcome back, Ms. Kerwin. I took the elevator to the executive floor, 2 levels above my previous department. My new office awaited, with windows overlooking the city and a nameplate already on the door. Inside, I found Lyra Westerly waiting. Everything to your satisfaction? She asked. It's a good start, I replied, setting down my bag. The transition team is ready whenever you are. They're eager to hear your plans for the Beaumont recovery strategy. I'll meet them this afternoon. First, I need to address my former department. Lyra raised an eyebrow but nodded. Of course. They're gathered in conference room A for Avira's emergency meeting. Perfect timing. 10 minutes later, I stood outside conference room A, listening to Avira's voice through the door as she outlined desperate measures to prevent further client defections. Must all pull together to weather this storm. I've prepared individual client retention assignments. I pushed open the door. The room fell silent. 20 faces turned toward me, some confused, others hopeful, a few wary. Avira stood frozen at the head of the table, presentation clicker in hand, her carefully applied makeup unable to hide her exhaustion. Brielle, she managed, recovering quickly. I heard about your new position. Congratulations. We were just discussing emergency measures for Fayan. I know what you were discussing. I interrupted calmly, moving to stand at the opposite end of the table. And I'm here to inform you that all major client retention efforts will now route through the Client Success Division. Avira's smile tightened. Perhaps we should discuss the transition privately. After this meeting? There's nothing to discuss, I replied. The board has approved my reorganization plan effective immediately. Your team will continue handling new business development, but implementation and retention for all existing clients now falls under my purview. The room erupted in whispers. Avira's face flushed with anger and humiliation, the same emotions I'd felt standing in the lobby with my belongings in garbage bags. This is completely inappropriate, she hissed. You can't just waltz in and... Actually, I can. It's all outlined in the memo that went out this morning. I'm surprised you haven't read it yet. I turned to address the room. Everyone who worked directly on implementation and client management should report to the executive conference room in 30 minutes for reassignment. That meant nearly everyone present. Avira's department would be gutted, left with just her and a few sales associates. As people gathered their things, expressions ranging from shocked to secretly pleased, I approached Avira directly. Don't worry, I said quietly, so only she could hear. You're not being fired. The board felt that would be too disruptive. You'll keep your title and office. You just won't have much to do besides basic sales. No client contact, no implementation oversight, no team to manage. The color drained from her face as she realized the full implications. This is your revenge, isn't it? You orchestrated this whole thing. I smiled, the same calm, knowing smile I'd given her from my car that day in the parking garage. I didn't orchestrate anything, Avira. I simply became so good they couldn't ignore me. I gestured to the nearly empty room. Everything else is just the natural consequence of your decisions. I turned to leave, then paused at the door. Oh, and don't bother looking for another position in this industry. I haven't said a negative word about you to anyone. I haven't had to. Your reputation has spread all on its own. In the hallway, I took a deep breath. This wasn't about cruelty or vindictiveness. This was justice. Avira would keep her job and salary, just as I'd been left with mine. But she would know, every day, that her power was gone. Her influence, evaporated. Her future, stagnant. She would sit in her glass office, watching as I rebuilt what she had tried to destroy. She would witness clients who once barely acknowledged her now seeking me out specifically. She would see her former team thriving under my leadership. And she would understand, finally, that the quiet, competent woman she had discarded so carelessly had been the foundation holding everything together. My revenge wasn't taking her job or ruining her career. My revenge was succeeding where she had expected me to fail. My revenge was becoming undeniable. Within 6 months, our client retention rate rose from 68% to 97%. Implementation complaints dropped to near zero. The Beaumont account returned, along with 3 others that had been considering departure. Our team expanded, adding specialties and capabilities that attracted new business across sectors. Avira remained in her glass office, handling basic sales calls and preparing reports that few people read. She never quit. That would have been admitting defeat. Instead, she adapted to her diminished role, occasionally attempting to insert herself into client relationships but finding no traction. A year to the day after I found my belongings in garbage bags, the board promoted me to Chief Client Officer, a new C-suite position, created to recognize the transformation I'd led. The announcement was made at the annual company meeting, with Avira sitting in the back row, politely applauding with everyone else. As I took the stage to accept, I caught her eye briefly. There was no anger there anymore, just a resigned acknowledgement of what we both knew. Her greatest mistake hadn't been firing me. It had been underestimating me. That evening, as I prepared to leave my office, I found a small package on my desk, a potted succulent, with a simple note, from one survivor to another. Mom. I placed it on my windowsill beside the offspring of my original office plant, the one that had been dumped in a garbage bag, yet somehow survived and thrived, just like me. If you enjoyed this story of resilience and professional revenge, Make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more gripping stories of triumph over adversity. What would you have done in Brielle's position? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Remember, sometimes the best revenge isn't about destroying others. It's about building yourself into something they can't ignore.
証明の仕方って何があるんですかね。
ただね、一つは過去に結婚をしていたということ